This is Joe Delia from the live community bringing you a webinar about GlobalProtect Best Practices, Tuning, and Resources, presented by David Cumbow and Derek Bergman. Take it away, David.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Hopefully this week of working remote for many of us has been a learning experience and hopefully has been fruitful for spending a little bit more time at home. So what we're going to be talking about today is GlobalProtect Best Practices, Tuning, and some of the resources available to you. If you've already joined one of these previous webinars, then the information at the beginning is going to be very much the same that you have seen previously. However, as always, there's going to be questions towards the end that may be specific to certain issues you may be facing or certain configuration questions you have. Joining me today, my name is David Cumbow, by the way. I'm a field engineering manager for Palo Networks. Joining me today, we have one of our systems engineers, Derek Bergman. As well as on the phone, we have Aaron McAllister, another systems engineer that's going to help us answer some of these questions as they come through. Just a little bit of logistics before we move forward. If you have questions, please utilize the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting. This will allow us to keep track of those questions as well as make sure we get all of them answered. If you do utilize the chat function, that generally gets lost within there, so please make sure you utilize that Q&A side. And feel free to ask questions at any time. The recording will be posted on the live community here coming next week. What we're doing is going through each of these webinars, separating out the question and answer section at the end from the general webinar. And then we're going to be posting that with all the questions listed as well. So if you do have any questions that you may have asked today, or you want to go through the questions that were asked in previous webinars, we'll definitely have those available for you to reference. So a little bit about agenda. We're just going to start with what is GlobalProtect. Many of you are utilizing it, but it's just a great quick refresher, as well as one of the other offerings we have, which is Prisma Access, which is essentially cloud-hosted GlobalProtect as a service if you want to consider it that. And then we'll go ahead and hop into those best practices. My portion up front here with what is GlobalProtect and what is Prisma Access is going to be pretty short, probably about 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll hop right into the best practices with Derek Bergman. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get rolling here. So when you look at what are the offerings around GlobalProtect from Palo Networks, why do end users generally implement that in their environment? The big aspect of it is they do not want to compromise, or they don't want to give up any of the security posture that they've already built on premise. They want to extend that out to the remote users wherever they may be in the world. The nice part about that is because you are extending that security posture that you build on your next generation firewalls, you get the same level of visibility for that user when they're off network as if they were sitting at their desk on network. The other nice part about it is the security policies. You can utilize the same security policies you have today, or one of the best practices we'll talk about is creating a VPN specific zone. You could still utilize those same policies. You would just then put that VPN zone into that security policy as a source or destination, depending on the route that traffic is flowing, and gives you the ability to have better control over exactly how your traffic looks. But it's utilizing security policies that are familiar to you today. And then finally, GlobalProtect does enable a few other additional features, right? One of them being clientless SSL VPN. So clientless SSL VPN is essentially I have internal resources that I want to open up and allow my remote users to utilize without the need to put a client on their end machine. I just want them to fire up a web browser, log into a portal, and then have access to internal resources. That's also enabled through GlobalProtect Subscription. And then the other one is host information profiling, or HIP, right? And HIP-based policy enforcement allows you to go through and not only understand what's the application that's being accessed, who's the user or user group that's accessing that, but also what device are they accessing it from? And is it organization owned? Is it a private device that you may have put GlobalProtect on? Is the operating system up to date? Is antivirus up to date? Things on that line. So it gives you a little bit more control over the traffic and whether you want to allow that traffic to flow or not. And as I mentioned, there is also another offering. We call it Prisma Access, formerly known as GlobalProtect Cloud Service. And that's exactly what it is. It's GlobalProtect. It's PAN-OS, to be pretty exact. It's PAN-OS that is hosted in Google infrastructure that scales up to the needs that you need it. So the nice thing about it, and I specifically call it out on being on Google infrastructure, The nice thing about that is we're utilizing Google backbones and Google data centers and Google's ability to scale, which many other companies don't have that specific ability, right? If you're hosting this in a private data center owned by a company, they still have limitations of that data center, whereas Google is definitely made to scale in that regards. And that provides a few different things, right? Speed and agility, not only to deploy it, but also just better end user experiences. So because we are utilizing that Google infrastructure, we don't put any limitations on bandwidth, things on that line, things you may run into if you're hosting on premise. That's not there for you. And then ultimately what it comes down to is if I had to build out a solution to support 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, hundreds of thousand end users for on-premise solution, I'm talking about big bandwidth links, high, working with my ISP to get big bandwidth links, as well as a lot of hardware on-premise to scale that out. So one of the advantages of Prisma Access is we take a lot of that requirement off of you. We'll manage all the infrastructure. You just manage the security policy through Panorama as you would as if it were another next generation firewall. So just some quick bullet points between the two, and feel free to, I should say, don't worry about taking pictures or taking too many notes about this. I'm going to send this presentation out in PDF format once we're completed here. But as you can see, right, with on-prem, some of the things you should consider is the fact that what are my bandwidth links as well? So if I'm trying to enable 5,000 remote users to work remotely over a 1 gig internet link, I may run into some bandwidth limitations depending on what my end user experience expectations are. On the Prisma Access side, those are again alleviated. However, you do have some concerns around what are some on-premise resources that I might still need to access within my data center. So Prisma Access does give you those connections, we call them service connections, back down to your data center. What are some of those on-premise resources I have, and what's the bandwidth limitations that I may have in that regards too? Either way, whichever solution you decide to go with, Palo Networks is here ready to help, right? On the on-prem side, if you have a next generation firewall deployed already, and you don't have the GlobalProtect subscription, we're offering that up for 90 days for free, so that way you can take advantage of some of the advanced features as well as the tuning offerings that we're going to be talking about today. And if you do decide to go with the Prisma Access side of the house, we are very aggressive around evaluations, purchases, including pro services, things along that line. So please reach out to your Palo Networks team in regards to that. So as I mentioned, there is a GlobalProtect is actually included for free with your next generation firewall for Mac and Windows users. So a lot of folks out there do have take-home devices, maybe for the IT or for board or cabinet members or higher ups within executives within the company. And they are currently utilizing GlobalProtect for a handful of take-home users that are on Windows or Mac devices, and that's included for free. But what's added or what's included in the subscription, what's in addition? So host information profiling, as I mentioned, as well as clientless VPN, as well as support for mobile devices, iOS, Chrome, Android, things on that line, and Linux systems. You have IPv6 support for external gateways. So if you are running IPv6 on your next generation firewall, you would need that GlobalProtect subscription for that. And then finally, one of the tuning aspects we're going to talk about today is that split tunneling side of the house. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Derek Bergman, who's actually going to be running through the GlobalProtect best practices in tuning. If you do have any questions, again, please utilize the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom meeting. And with that said, Derek, it's all yours, sir.
Thanks, Dave. So in this section, I'm going to go through the GlobalProtect best practices in tuning. So these are essentially the common practices with regards to their admin guides and quick configs that we have out there. And then we'll include the links at the end of the presentation, as Dave mentioned, and also copy the slide deck here. But these two sections that we're looking at, the first part we're looking at, again, those common practices or best practices with regards to those configs. And then that second section here, we're looking at the tuning practices. And these really help with those situations where you have limited resources as far as bandwidth and hardware. But also I want to make a note, tuning does not necessarily mean best practices with regards to security. So the first one we have on the list here is creating a dedicated security zone for VPN traffic. And you want to create a dedicated security zone so you provide complete visibility into the tunneled interface and IP pools used for your remote users. This is important because it allows you to just maintain that separation for compliance purposes or detecting intruders or containing attacks against remote users. And the beauty of our platform being zone-based is this allows you to have that, again, maintain that compliance. So now you're creating policies or dedicated policies based on that zone and segmenting that traffic. The next one here is just creating security or NAT policies for secured traffic from VPN zone. So in the previous one, we looked at that dedicated zone. Here, we're just maintaining that zero trust architecture by utilizing the dedicated security zone or the VPN zone that we created in combination with user ID and app ID. So being able to specify a known user or a specific user groups, they can all be used to build out your policies. And it's important because it just reduces your attack surface with regards to shadow IT operations, eliminating direct access for third-party organizations, or again, just maintaining that compliance. You're now having to just create dedicated policies. You want to allow any traffic in your environment instead of having that VPN tunnel terminate to your just internal network and the existing policies. You have to create explicit policies now to say, I want to allow this. And it just helps with that maintaining that compliance. You can also consider the HIP profiles, as Dave was mentioning, the host information profiling. So if you have those dedicated policies that are just for the VPN traffic, you can now apply those profiles to these policies and have just more granularity and not affect your normal or internal traffic. So the next one is importing a server certificate from a well-known third-party CA. And this is important because it just ensures that the end users are able to establish the HTTPS connection without seeing warnings about untrusted certificates. And this isn't the only way to do it. So if you have a PKI or public key infrastructure, you can easily deploy certificates and trust them on the endpoints for that initial connection. But just be aware of expiring certificates. So there's tools out there to monitor your certificates. You can also use things like calendar invites or reminders. So there's a low-tech option there. So the next one is enabling AlwaysOn. This is important because it just automatically connects users to the portal without manual intervention. So this allows you to just maintain that visibility and for security, like Dave was mentioning, at just all times for remote workers. Now, if you have Windows or Mac workstations, you can use the pre-logon AlwaysOn option for situations where you have logon scripts or group policies that need to apply to a workstation prior to someone logging on to the device. So going into the tuning section, we're going to look at QoS, or quality of service. And this is important because you just want to make sure that your business critical applications have the resources needed for that connectivity or availability on your network. And really, we walk through this as starting from the ACC tab or the Application Command Center. You start identifying those applications that are maybe taking a lot of resources as far as bandwidth in your environment, maybe those heavy hitters. So here, as an example here, we noticed that, maybe updates are taking a lot of the bandwidth, or we're seeing a lot of usage there through that VPN tunnel. We can use that and pivot to the traffic logs and find the egress interface. Where is that traffic going out of? And that's really where you're going to apply that QoS policy. So as an example, we have the updates listed here in the applications for a QoS policy. But you can also consider a user ID. So maybe you have a CEO or a director that needs access to a specific application. You want to guarantee maybe a certain set of bandwidth for that user, or in this case of the updates, maybe you want to limit that, make sure there's a max as far as the bandwidth for those applications. You can definitely do that. And we definitely recommend this as a tuning practice, especially if you're looking at tunneling traffic or tunneling all your traffic back. And as Dave was mentioning, you have a limitation on bandwidth. This is definitely one of those things that we recommend. So the other aspect of tuning is split tunneling, and we're going to specifically look at access routes here in this tab. But again, just a reminder, split tunneling is not a security best practice. When you're talking about best practice from a security aspect, you want to make sure all traffic is tunneling through, so you have that complete visibility and enforcement on the traffic. But if you did have the need to set up the split tunneling and using the access routes here, you can definitely exclude, for example, private networks, 192.168 in here to exclude those from the tunnel. Or if you wanted to just include portions of your internal network, maybe a subnet or a range of IPs that you want to include, you can definitely do that. And as a note, if you do put an include range of IPs in there or a subnet in the include list, everything else is excluded in there, just so you know. But this just gives you some tuning flexibility. Again, we're going to recommend that you look at the QoS first before you do any kind of split tunneling, and definitely not a best practice to do the split tunneling, but it does give you some flexibility there. This is important because it just alleviates those bottlenecks or conserves bandwidth for those more critical business applications. The downside, again, because it's not a best practice, is just gives you a false sense of security, and then again, lack of visibility into that traffic that is not tunneled back. So the other component of the split tunneling, as we looked at the tab to the left of this, was the access routes. You also have the capability of, with the split tunneling, doing it based on domain or application. Again, this requires the GlobalProtect subscription to do this, but you can also include important domains or excluding less important domains. In this example here in the screenshot, I just have salesforce.com, maybe all the subdomains of salesforce.com I want to include in that VPN tunnel. But maybe reddit.com, I'm not too worried about, I want to exclude that. We're seeing a lot of traffic maybe through Reddit. Again, split tunneling is not a best practice here. You want to make sure you get complete visibility. But again, this is just more of that flexibility you have. Below that, you have the client application process names. And you can consider things like secure backups. Maybe, code 42, you have a backup application that already has encrypted traffic going out. And you don't necessarily want that to tunnel back through your environment out to your backup location. You can definitely add that executable or that location in the exclude list here. Now there's an order for the split tunneling. It goes the client process first, looks there for the processing, then the domains, and then IP addresses. And as a note here, if you're doing the include and excluding domains, you do need to make sure that DNS is traversing that tunnel for this enforcement to take place. Okay, now we're going to look at the GlobalProtect settings and the best practice assessment tool. So the best practice assessment tool is a free tool. It's available for customers on the customer support portal. But really, the tool looks at two different areas. One looks at the adoption rates as far as how well you're adopting the technologies, security technologies through Palo networks, and then also looking at the industry best practice standards. Really, what are those best practices that the industry is using to secure your environment and increase your security posture? And both of these really, in that this tool just gives you that really to help you with getting the most value out of your investment with Palo Networks. So these are some of the common best practice checks performed within the BPA tool for GlobalProtect. And the BPA tool will look at everything, all the configuration settings in your entire firewall, but specifically here we're focusing on GlobalProtect. There are more checks in this for GlobalProtect, but we're just kind of looking at the common ones here. And they do explicitly call out or delineate between the portal configuration and the gateway configurations when you're looking at using the tool and looking at the report. So we'll go through these now. First one is setting the minimum TLS version. So in the screenshot here, we have an example that explicitly calls out making sure that the minimum version of TLS for the TLS service profile or the initial portal config server authentication for GlobalProtect is set to TLS version 1.2. And again, this is the initial connection being established with the portal. This is important because you want to reduce your attack surface by not allowing outdated algorithms or crypto systems. And then it helps you just maintain compliance, or at least stay ahead of compliance standards by setting these best practices and following what the report is saying. The next one here is enabling two-factor authentication. So specifically, we're going to look at certificate-based authentication in combination with username and password authentication as two factors, but there's multiple options. You can use one-time passwords, even smart cards. We have capabilities of working with Ping or Okta, RSA, Azure MFA for your authentication methods. But again, we're looking at specifically in this screenshot here, we're looking at the portal with a certificate-based authentication. Now, certificates do need to be deployed for this, for the end devices to use that certificate-based authentication. But it is important because it just provides that strong authentication method to just protect your sensitive assets or even comply with regulatory requirements such as PCI, SOX, or HIPAA. But it also protects against credential stuffing, spraying, brute forcing, phishing. There's really any targeted credential attacks against remote workers. This will help with. So the second screenshot here, we're looking at the gateway configuration. So the first one we're looking at the portal, now we're looking at the gateway. And this is using the LDAP authentication. So username and password authentication. And this completes that two-factor authentication. So the first one with the portal configuration, again, we're looking at the initial connection where you're getting the client configuration as well as which gateway you're going to establish tunnels with. That's going to be using that certificate-based authentication, and then the gateway will use that username and password to complete the second factor with something you know, and then with something you have as a certificate. The next one here, we're looking at disabling GlobalProtect for certain timeout only. So if you're allowing users to disable GlobalProtect, we highly recommend using the disable timeout parameter. And this is really what it does is just restricts the amount of time for which users can disable the GlobalProtect app. This is important because you want to ensure that GlobalProtect resumes and establishes a VPN once the timeout is complete, and then just maintaining that security for the user while they're accessing resources through GlobalProtect. The next one is collecting HIP data. So as Dave mentioned previously, is the host information profile data. And this does require that GlobalProtect subscription. But the GlobalProtect app collects and sends the host information data from the endpoint to the firewall. And this allows you to do that HIP-based policy enforcement. So if you remember previously we were talking about a dedicated security zone and a dedicated security policy from that VPN zone to certain areas of network based on the user and app or applications that are needing access. Now you can apply those HIP-based, that information sent from the endpoint to the firewall and apply that to your policies for policy enforcement. And really the HIP data is just matched against whatever HIP objects or profiles that you define for your enforcement. So for example, I want to make sure that a client that is connecting through GlobalProtect, that it has a certain anti-malware definition version, or maybe it was scanned within a certain time period, the last scan that was ran. I want to check that before it establishes a certain connection or accesses a certain resource. Also being able to identify the OS patch level. So you want to make sure the operating system patch level is on a certain or minimum version before connecting to a critical resource or an application that is in your environment. Or maybe checking for disk encryption. I want to make sure that disk encryption is enabled before clients on the VPN zone or GlobalProtect clients have that disk encryption before accessing resources where they could pull off and download, sensitive information that I don't want to leave my environment. And then as well as custom checks. So for example, you have a certain, maybe a financial fit client that is on a device with GlobalProtect on there. You want to check the fit client version, maybe in combination with the OS patch level. So maybe it has to be on a certain version of that financial fit client, as well as a certain patch level for the operating system before it connects to my financial system. So you can do things like that for your policy enforcement. This is important because it just reduces your attack surface further by maintaining that security and segmentation for devices that maybe out of compliance or maybe don't fall under the standard that you have set for connectivity. And the last one here we're looking at is including the QuasiRoute route or access route in your split tunnel. And again, we talked about previously the tuning, having the ability to set different include and exclude for your access routes. This one is the best practice. If you're going to tunnel, you have an external gateway where you're tunneling traffic back, you want to include all access through that tunnel for that complete visibility inspection. And really the access routes here are just specifying those destination subnets or IP addresses ranges that you want to include in that tunnel when the GlobalProtect establishes the tunnel with that gateway. So an access route here of QuasiRoute is just indicating that you're including all destination subnets or addresses through that tunnel. And this is important because it just maintains that complete visibility and security over traffic originating from the GlobalProtect clients or remote workers in this case. There are more checks in the BPA tool. Again, these are just the common ones that we're looking at here, but feel free to reach out to your SE for more information on the best practice assessment tool. Again, it is free. So if you go to the customer support portal at support.palonordics.com, on the left-hand side, there's a tree there. If you navigate down to tools, expand that out, you'll see best practice assessment. If you click on that, essentially what you do is upload a tech support file from your firewall or panorama, and it'll walk through the steps of generating the report for you to go through all these checks. And again, beyond GlobalProtect, you'll go through all the configurations in your firewall. But again, we're just looking at GlobalProtect here. That being said, I'll hand it back over to Dave for the troubleshooting tips and tricks.
Thanks, Derek. Great information. Appreciate it. Just as a reminder, everybody, the Q&A section is open. So if you do have any questions, feel free to post them in there. So, as always, there's always going to be a need to troubleshoot setup of any type of device, right, or any type of remote connection. So I just wanted to run you through a few of the key areas to check as you're going through and doing that troubleshooting. By all means, this isn't a deep dive into that aspect, but we do definitely have some great resources here. So, of course, with GlobalProtect, right, there's two sides of the story. There's the firewall side and there's also the agent side. So just a quick reminder, if you do have the GlobalProtect agent deployed, you can go through, right-click on that agent, go to the settings option. Under the settings option, there is a troubleshooting tab. Under that tab, you'll see the collect logs option. Kind of tells the other half of the story, if you will. It will go through and create a TGZ file. If you decrypt that TGZ file, then within that file, you'll see the pan_gp_event.log file. That's definitely your best friend in regards to figuring out what's going on the endpoint side. One of the things I used to do for troubleshooting is if I was sitting at my desk, have a laptop in front of me, connect up to a hotspot, and then try to do that troubleshooting, things along that line. So it definitely tells the other half of the story. A lot of information is within that file. On the firewall side of it, if you are looking for successful logins and you are prior to PanOS version 9.1, keep in mind as of Friday, March 27th, there is no preferred version of PanOS 9.1 yet, but PanOS 9.1 does have some enhancements in GlobalProtect logs. I personally wouldn't recommend upgrading just yet. Let's let that get to a preferred status before we go that route. But that being said, if you are on any version of PanOS and you want to look at some of the GlobalProtect logs that are in there, under Monitor Logs System, the subtype is GlobalProtect. And again, you're going to get a PDF version of this specific presentation, so you'll have these filters available for you to play around with. But subtype equals GlobalProtect. All your successful login and log out specifically are these search criteria. On the flip side of that, if you want to look at failures, here we go. Any failed login attempts, this specific search criteria here will give you a deep dive into that. That being said, we do have a great resource list. And again, this PDF will be available for you, so you don't have to worry about writing that specific URL down. But this specific GlobalProtect resource list gives you all the information you could possibly want around configuration and troubleshooting. It's definitely the holy grail in regards to all the information that you may need. Everything from basic to intermediate to even advanced configurations of GlobalProtect. On the flip side of that, GlobalProtect quick configs and architectures are available in the admin guide. The admin guides are absolutely great that we put together. So if you get a chance, feel free to deep dive into those. If you are a little bit lost by the hyperlinks and things on that line, every admin guide does have a generate PDF. Generate PDF will put everything in a PDF for you. That's step by step that you can then print out the pages or just reference the pages that are most pertinent to you. Again, that GP resources is the same page I showed on the last slide there. And then, finally, Palo Networks, your favorite partner, or even third-party resources such as Secure Dynamics, who is a professional service-only partner of Palo Networks. We're all here to help, right? So we definitely understand that these are challenging times and trying times for many of us, and we want to make sure that GlobalProtect is working for you as efficiently as possible. So please feel free to reach out, right? Your Palo Networks team is here to provide guidance, either what we can do ourselves, what Palo Networks professional services, or whatever your favorite professional services organization might be is here to provide that help. And if you don't know who your Palo Networks team is, feel free to reach out to rapid-response@palotonetworks.com, and they'll be able to help you find out who that team is. So everybody, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate you joining. Again, feel free to reach out to your Palo Networks support team or your Palo Networks field team, excuse me, if you have any questions. And if there's nothing else, we'll have a good one. Thank you so much for your time. Stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, David, for this great session about GlobalProtect Best Practices. There were some Q&A sessions after these webinars that will be hosted in a separate video, and I will link to that in the description below. As always, we welcome all questions and comments below. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to be notified of all of our new videos coming from the live community. Thanks again and have a great day.